In the heart of the metropolitan financial district, where architectural giants of glass and steel pierced the troposphere and high-end sedans cruised along immaculately maintained avenues, a young girl with skin stained by the streets and eyes heavy with exhaustion wrestled with the imposing entryway of the Sovereign Pinnacle Trust. Her name was Kyra Jones, and she held a severely battered plastic card between her fingers like it was the sole remaining charter of her existence. The midday sun streamed in through the immense floor-to-ceiling panes, yet Kyra appeared to be an apparition, a frail, quivering silhouette against the background of polished travertine and monumental columns. As she took her hesitant first steps onto the gleaming floor, heads involuntarily swiveled. Not out of charitable concern, but out of bewilderment, shock, and a discernible air of disdain. Her requirement was straightforward. She needed to verify the numerical value attached to her account. Kyra's difficult path to the bank was not motivated by sudden bravery. It was born out of utter despair. For the last 72 hours, she had been drifting through the cityscape, possessing only pocket change, dressed in a faded charcoal shirt and denim trousers that hung precariously on her slender frame. Her deceased mother had issued one solemn instruction, repeated countless times before her passing: safeguard the small ivory-colored bank card. Kyra had adhered to this command for years, unsure if the relic held any substantive meaning. She knew only that today, with the agonizing grip of starvation tightening in her gut and passers-by recoiling from her presence on the sidewalks, she was compelled to test the card's worth, to discover if her mother had bequeathed her a life-altering fortune or absolute nothingness. The interior of the Sovereign Pinnacle Trust vibrated with a velocity and opulence that Kyra had never encountered. Digital displays cycled through complex stock tickers and fiscal graphs. Employees in impeccably tailored business attire rushed past one another, managing portfolios and carrying specialty coffee beverages. Telephones chimed relentlessly. Every corner radiated an unmistakable aura of extreme affluence. Centrally located within this nexus of capital and influence sat Alistair Vance, a towering figure in the city's investment landscape and one of its most notoriously wealthy financiers. His boisterous laughter resonated loudly, sweeping across the floor as he engaged his entourage of corporate analysts. He was an individual accustomed to prevailing, to wielding authority, and to operating beyond accountability. Nothing conventional could ever disturb his formidable composure. But then his gaze snagged on Kyra. She was positioned near the client relations counter, nervously pushing her aged card across the granite surface. The teller assigned to her, named Serafina Reed, momentarily froze upon observing the girl's pitiable condition. Patrons in the vicinity stared. Some displayed a flicker of sympathy, many more registered outright astonishment, and a few exhibited plain annoyance. Kyra's request was delivered in a voice barely above a whisper as she articulated her simple need. Serafina offered a reassuring, gentle smile and subtly directed her toward Alistair Vance's specialized area. This was because his executive terminal possessed the unique capability to access the deep, dormant archives of outdated and rarely used trust accounts. Kyra was unaware of this technical detail. She simply obeyed, driven by the singular desire to finally ascertain if any reserves remained for her in this world. Alistair observed her approach with thinly veiled condescension. He presumed this was an attempt at some misguided social experiment, or perhaps more likely, a gross administrative error. He settled back deeper into his custom leather chair, emitting a soft, patronizing chuckle as the diminutive figure reached the counter. With a hesitant movement, she extended the card, an old, peeling debit card that had long since surpassed its expiration date. Alistair inwardly scoffed at the utter absurdity of the scenario, a financial titan being solicited to verify the account balance of a visibly destitute child. The situation was so inherently ludicrous that he could not suppress the widening, dismissive smirk on his face. However, Kyra was not sharing in the amusement. Her hands were visibly trembling. Her eyes nervously flickered around the cavernous room, absorbing every critical and judgmental stare directed at her. She required only resolution. a singular moment of unvarnished truth. The general clamor of the bank seemed to dissipate into an eerie silence as Alistair carelessly inserted the dilapidated card into the terminal. Then everything fundamentally shifted. Alistair's mocking expression vanished instantly. His heavy eyebrows slowly converged. He instinctively leaned closer to the screen, rereading the figures displayed, as if they might reorganize themselves into a more plausible, less staggering arrangement. His chief analyst, who had been listening in, stepped nearer, their face transforming from mere curiosity to outright dumbstruck shock. Serafina held her breath, her eyes wide. The numeric balance on the monitor was not zero. It was not insignificant. It was profoundly abnormal for someone in Kyra's visible circumstances. It was colossal. Kyra's mother had once volunteered at a neighborhood resource center where she had befriended a remarkably generous yet eccentric philanthropist named Elias Thorne. He was elderly, childless, and deeply indebted to Kyra's mother for the devoted care she had provided him during his final months of terminal illness. Without either Kyra or her mother knowing, Elias had meticulously established a fortified trust fund explicitly in Kyra's name, a financial instrument engineered to grow exponentially year after year, completely untouched. The fund compounded interest and included diversified investments that Elias had legally mandated to continue accumulating even posthumously. His profound hope was that one day Kyra would discover her way to this resource precisely when her need was most dire. And this cold, bright morning was that exact day. Alistair Vance stared at the 8-figure total, the realization washing over him that the girl standing before him was not merely a waif seeking charity. She was, in objective financial terms, one of the wealthiest private individuals he had ever personally encountered, a wealth she was utterly unaware of, a fortune poised to irrevocably change the trajectory of her life. For the first time in his hyper-successful, overconfident life, Alistair felt utterly humbled, completely and profoundly silenced. The small, ragged girl that he had openly mocked and laughed at was now the true custodian of an inheritance that quantitatively overshadowed the entire portfolios of several of his most celebrated clients. The entire banking hall watched in hushed reverence as Alistair slowly propelled himself out of his executive chair. He looked at Kyra, no longer with a trace of pity, but with deep, unreserved respect. A respect she had commanded without even being aware of her leverage. Kyra, meanwhile, had no capacity to comprehend the series of digits on the screen. She only recognized that Alistair's demeanor had abruptly changed, less amused, significantly more human. Serafina knelt gracefully beside her and began to quietly explain the overwhelming reality. As the words registered, Kyra's mouth fell open in utter astonishment. Tears immediately flooded her exhausted eyes. She was no longer solitary. She was not without recourse. Her mother had secured for her something far more powerful than she had ever imagined: stability, profound hope, and the undeniable assurance of a future. Whispers spread throughout the bank, stunned patrons processing the sheer magnitude of the scene they had just witnessed. Alistair, the man notorious for his insufferable arrogance, was now gently assisting Kyra in gathering her scant possessions. He immediately offered her food, hydration, and solemnly promised to assign his most proficient financial strategists to safeguard her newfound assets until an appropriate, court-appointed custodian could be formally established. Kyra could only nod, still reeling from the shock, clutching the small card that had just radically redefined her life. The sun still shone brightly, its light shimmering through the towering windows, but for Kyra, the world felt reborn, warmer, dramatically brighter, and finally, unequivocally secure. The revelation of Kyra's colossal trust fund rippled through the financial district like an unforeseen earthquake, but the tremor was strongest within the personal domain of Alistair Vance. While his initial reaction was one of stunned humility, this quickly morphed into a complex calculus of opportunity and self-interest.
Alistair was renowned for his predatory business instincts and the sheer scale of the Thorne inheritance, a fund meticulously structured and generating staggering returns, represented a challenge and a potential prize he could not ignore. He mentally discarded his morning schedule, instructing his assistants to clear his calendar. His immediate priority shifted from managing existing billionaire clients to securing the future guardianship and management of Kyra Jones's wealth. He saw not a vulnerable child, but a vast, untapped reserve of capital waiting for the right shepherd, and Alistair Vance believed himself to be the only man qualified for the role. He quickly ushered Kyra and Serafina, the attentive teller, into his private, soundproofed executive suite, a space dominated by dark wood and panoramic city views. The contrast between the suite's relentless luxury and Kyra's threadbare clothes was stark, yet Kyra, bolstered by the sudden, overwhelming sense of security, carried herself with a nascent dignity. Alistair smoothly transitioned from the surprised bystander to the paternal protector. He emphasized the necessity of immediate action, detailing the legal complexities and the inevitable swarm of opportunistic individuals who would soon emerge. His voice was steady, modulated to convey sincere concern, a performance honed by years of negotiating multi-million-dollar deals. He spoke of safeguarding her mother's legacy, using terms like fiduciary duty, asset protection, and long-term growth. Serafina, though assigned to Kyra by Alistair himself, watched him with a growing sense of reservation. She had witnessed Alistair's initial sneer and his rapid shift in demeanor. While his words were reassuring, his eyes held a calculating intensity that made her uneasy. She focused on Kyra, offering small, grounding comforts, a glass of chilled water, a freshly baked pastry brought up from the executive kitchen. Serafina was from the community, knew the struggles, and her concern for Kyra was genuine, untainted by financial ambition. She subtly interjected, ensuring that Kyra understood that she was the owner, not just a passive recipient, reminding the girl that she had the right to ask questions and take her time. Alistair smoothly marginalized Serafina's contributions, focusing the conversation solely on the necessity of appointing a professional manager, a role he made perfectly clear he was willing to undertake. Alistair spent the next hour laying out a strategy that positioned him as Kyra's immediate essential shield. He promised to hire the best legal team to fast-track her official emancipation or the appointment of a suitable bank-vetted guardian. He stressed that without a powerful figure like himself intervening, the funds could be tied up in litigation for years, leaving her back on the street. It was a potent mixture of truth and the strategic exaggeration, designed to induce dependency and expedite his control. He presented documentation, complex-looking agreements, authorizing the bank's trust division, which he effectively oversaw, to begin managing the assets. Kyra, overwhelmed by the volume of information and the sudden shift from extreme destitution to unimaginable wealth, simply nodded, her mind struggling to reconcile the reality of a trust fund with the immediate memory of sleeping on cold concrete. During a brief moment when Alistair stepped out to take a crucial, staged phone call, Serafina knelt beside Kyra again. "Listen to me, Kyra," she whispered urgently, her eyes scanning the closed door. "Mr. Vance is a businessman, first and foremost. Be careful. This money is your power. Do not sign anything without a lawyer who is not paid by this bank reading it first. Ask him for clothes, a hotel, a real bed, right now. The rest can wait until you have rested and thought clearly." Kyra looked at Serafina, her only genuine ally in this dizzying whirlwind, and grasped her hand, a silent promise passing between them. When Alistair returned, his face was grave. "The lawyers are already moving. We need to secure you immediately. I've arranged a temporary living arrangement, a small, highly secure penthouse apartment managed by the bank's corporate holdings. It's the safest place for you until we establish a permanent residence and a protection detail." It sounded magnanimous, but the apartment was a bank asset, meaning Kyra would be housed in a location where her movements and contacts could be easily monitored. Kyra, remembering Serafina's advice, spoke for the first time with a clear, steady voice. "I need new clothes first, please, and a place that is mine, not just temporary. And I need to talk to a lawyer my mother would have chosen, if possible." Alistair blinked, momentarily thrown by the shift in her passive demeanor. "Of course, clothes are simple, but the lawyer. We must prioritize efficiency, Kyra. Time is a weapon others will use against you." "Efficiency can wait for a day," Kyra countered, repeating a phrase her mother used when dealing with complex problems. "I am tired. I need to be safe tonight. Then we talk to the lawyers." Reluctantly, Alistair conceded. The girl's sudden firmness, echoing the conviction of a client rather than a ward, momentarily forced him to adjust his approach. He had anticipated a compliant, easily managed child. He was encountering something more formidable. He directed an aide to take Kyra shopping at an upscale boutique, instructing them to purchase a full wardrobe and personal effects suitable for her new station. He also made the point of personally booking her into a 5-star hotel suite under an alias, knowing the gesture of respect, even if temporary, would further solidify his image as her patron. The power shift was subtle, but significant. Kyra had asserted her first boundary, and Alistair, realizing the potential for a long-term, lucrative association, chose not to break it. As Kyra left the bank accompanied by the aide and Serafina, who insisted on walking her out, Alistair watched them from his window. His initial disdain was entirely gone, replaced with a cold, sharp focus. He had access to the full details of the Thorn Trust, its sheer size, its annual yield, its ironclad stipulations protecting the principal. This was not a short-term advisory fee. This was generational wealth management, secured with a child's simple signature. He immediately began coordinating with his senior partners, formulating a long-game strategy that would ensure he, Alistair Vance, remained the central figure in Kyra Jones's financial life for the foreseeable future, maximizing the bank's and his own percentage of the vast inheritance. The dramatic rescue is over. The serious, calculated game of control had just begun. He smiled, a genuine predator's smile this time. Kyra was safe, but only as safe as he allowed her to be. Kyra, riding in the back of a luxury sedan, observed the city flashing by. The feeling of the soft leather seat, the climate-controlled air, the quiet competence of the driver. It was a world away from the grimy, loud chaos she had known hours ago. Serafina sat beside her, holding her hand. "You did good back there," Serafina murmured. "Stay smart. Don't trust the shine." Kyra looked down at the worn-out bank card she still clutched, now placed inside a small velvet pouch Serafina had provided. It was no longer a symbol of desperation, but a key that unlocked a room full of power, but also a room full of dangerous shadows. She knew the fight was not over. It had just moved from the struggle for survival to the fight for control. The revenge element of her mother's life, the unnamed person or force that had kept her mother from accessing these funds, leading to their poverty and her eventual death, was still a blurry, painful question mark. But now Kyra had the resources to find the answers. Her mother had left her not just money, but a weapon she would learn to wield, first to protect herself, and then perhaps to settle a debt only she now understood. The golden afternoon light filtering through the tinted windows seemed to promise both safety and the chilling, sharp edge of retribution.
The following weeks were a dizzying blur of controlled transition for Kyra. Alistair Vance, master of appearances, established a meticulously curated existence for her. She was relocated from the temporary hotel to a modest yet beautifully furnished brownstone in a respectable, though not overtly extravagant, neighborhood, maintaining the illusion of responsible stewardship. This was done to appease the impending legal scrutiny. He ensured she had private tutors, security staff, and a rotation of bank-approved personal shoppers and assistants. Every convenience was afforded, but every connection was filtered through the Sovereign Pinnacle Trust's apparatus. Kyra was safe, clean, and educated, but she was, essentially, a highly valuable, well-kept prisoner of her own fortune. The legal proceedings moved forward with Alistair's characteristic ruthless speed. His legal team managed to convince the court that since Kyra was a minor with no immediate kin, the bank, through Alistair's personal oversight, was the most stable and responsible interim guardian for the estate. The court agreed to a temporary arrangement. Kyra's personal needs would be met lavishly, but the control of the principal trust fund remained solely with the bank's investment management division, which, in reality, meant Alistair. Serafina Reed, the kind teller, was discreetly promoted to an administrative position within the trust division, a strategic move by Alistair to keep a potentially demotional variable close, where he could monitor her loyalty and access to Kyra. He underestimated Serafina's determination and integrity. Despite the comforts, Kyra felt the tight leash. She missed the freedom of the open air, even the frightening uncertainty of the streets, compared to the suffocating predictability of her protected life. Her primary focus, however, was not on escaping, but on understanding the origin of her fortune and, crucially, the details surrounding her mother's death. Kyra intuitively believed there was a connection between the secrecy of the Thorn Trust and the hardships her mother endured. Why had her mother never accessed the funds? Why had she only carried the card, never using it?
Kyra began her investigation steadily, using the limited autonomy she possessed. She cultivated a relationship with Serafina, who visited her frequently under the guise of financial literacy lessons. Serafina, working discreetly, became Kyra's eyes and ears. Kyra's tutoring sessions, intended to teach her academic subjects, were cleverly manipulated to focus on financial law, estate planning, and most importantly, the history of the Sovereign Pinnacle Trust and its key personnel. She studied Alastair Vance's history, finding a consistent pattern of aggressive takeovers and strategic dispossession of vulnerable entities. The trust was established by Victor Thorne. He was childless and grateful to my mother. Why would a man that caring make the fund so inaccessible? The card didn't even have a PIN or an account number printed on it. It was just a blank magnetic strip. How was she supposed to use it? Serafina pointed to a clause deep within the original trust documentation. Look at this, Kyra. Clause 4B. Access to principal funds is conditional on activation at the Sovereign Pinnacle Trust's executive terminal, and only by the beneficiary or an authorized designee who must be a principal officer of the bank. This is unusual even for a high-value trust. It means your mother, if she didn't know the exact executive procedure, could not activate it at a normal ATM or teller window. She had to go straight to the top, to someone like Alastair. A chilling realization settled over Kyra. Her mother, proud and private, had likely walked into a small local branch, been turned away by a low-balance inquiry, and, humiliated, never tried again, assuming the card was worthless. The fear of being laughed at, the fear of asking too much, the very vulnerability that had plagued her mother's life was precisely what had kept the fortune locked away. But why did Thorne include such a restrictive, almost spiteful clause? Serafina, guided by Kyra's focused questioning, started digging into Alastair Vance's connections. She unearthed a crucial detail. Alastair Vance was a distant nephew of Victor Thorne. The relationship was strained, and Vance was completely cut out of Thorne's will, except for one thing. Thorne's will stipulated that in the event the beneficiary of the trust, Kyra, was deemed legally incapable of managing the funds, or if the funds remained dormant for a period of 10 years after Thorne's death, the management fees and a percentage of the annual yield would revert to Thorne's estate, managed by the Sovereign Pinnacle Trust, with Alastair as the appointed executor of the general estate. The implication was devastatingly clear. Alastair Vance had a powerful indirect financial incentive to ensure Kyra did not access the principal for as long as possible. Every year the fund remained dormant meant massive management fees and yields flowed directly or indirectly to his control and the bank's profit margin. His sudden paternal protection was a carefully orchestrated move to secure the management now that the trust was active. The initial laughter and scorn he directed at the impoverished Kyra in the bank lobby were not just arrogance. They were the actions of a man who believed his gravy train was about to be derailed by a street urchin. His swift intervention was damage control, securing the management before a truly independent guardian could claim it. The immediate grief was quickly superseded by a crystalline clarity of purpose. The revenge plot was no longer an abstract idea. It was a necessary and just pursuit. Her mother's suffering, her untimely death, were not due to fate or poverty, but to the cold, calculated avarice of one man, Alastair Vance. "We need proof," Kyra stated, the emotion in her voice replaced with steel. "Specific, undeniable proof that he deliberately kept my mother from accessing those funds, that he profited from her destitution, or that he manipulated the activation clause." Serafina agreed, her face etched with grim determination. The only place that proof exists is in Alastair's personal digital archives, his old emails, correspondence with Thorne's original legal team, perhaps even memos to the board's bank about managing the Thorne liability. The trust division is heavily protected. His personal terminal is the most secure point in the entire bank. Kyra stood up, now no longer a frightened child, but a person with a mission. The luxurious brownstone, the tutors, the expensive clothes, they all felt like props in a play she was now directing. She realized Alastair had given her the tools he thought would keep her complacent, but she would repurpose them into weapons. She had access to education, a secure base, and the only person who understood the system from the inside, Serafina. She looked out the window at the distant glittering towers of the financial district, focusing on the dark glass of the Sovereign Pinnacle Trust. The game of control was about to become a game of dismantling. She would use the power of the Thorne money, the very thing Alastair coveted, to orchestrate his utter ruin and reclaim the dignity her mother was stripped of. Her vengeance would be slow, precise, and financially catastrophic.
Kyra's transformation from an impoverished survivor to a determined strategist was chillingly swift. She used the resources Alistair Vance provided, the private tutoring, the unlimited internet access, and the quiet comfort of the brownstone as an advanced operational base. Her academic focus shifted entirely to corporate espionage and digital forensics, framed to her tutors as intense interest in financial security. She meticulously trained her memory, absorbing every detail Serafina provided about the bank's internal security architecture, server locations, access protocols, and Alistair's personal habits. Serafina became her indispensable mole, providing classified floor plans, employee login patterns, and, most critically, the physical layout of Alistair's executive suite and his specialized terminal. The key to Kyra's plan hinged on understanding Alistair's hubris. He was arrogant enough to believe that a child, even a wealthy one, could never comprehend the complexities of his corporate maneuverings. This assurance led to vulnerabilities. Alistair would often work late, dismissing his core security staff to maintain an image of singular authority and tireless dedication. The critical moment, Kyra determined, would be during the Sovereign Pinnacle Trust's annual black-tie charity gala, a mandatory event that would leave Alistair's personal executive security detail stretched thin, focused on protecting the public event rather than his private terminal. The gala was scheduled for 3 months later. Kyra spent those 3 months mastering the art of infiltration and subtle manipulation. She had to bypass multiple layers of biometric and digital security to access the deep archives of Alistair's terminal, where his historical communications regarding the Thorn Trust were likely stored. She covertly utilized her online resources to purchase and learn basic lockpicking tools and small, sophisticated data extraction devices, delivered discreetly to her address under the guise of educational materials. Every night, after her security detail retired to the adjoining apartment, Kyra practiced. She was preparing for a singular, high-stakes raid on the very institution that was supposed to protect her, but was in reality throttling her life. Meanwhile, she played the role of the appreciative, compliant ward perfectly. She excelled in her studies, offered polite, grateful updates to Alistair during their weekly video calls, and showed no interest in the financial mechanics of her wealth, merely expressing childlike wishes for non-essential items like art supplies and rare books. This confirmed Alistair's assessment. The girl was easily managed, her focus safely diverted to frivolous pursuits. He even began to relax his constant vigilance, allowing her to take supervised trips outside the brownstone for cultural enrichment, which Kyra used to scout escape routes and time traffic patterns around the bank's district. Serafina, under the guise of delivering weekly expense reports and signing educational waivers, provided the final critical piece of information. His executive terminal has a physical security failsafe. If the biometric scanner fails after 5 attempts, it defaults to a numerical passcode used only by the head of security and Alistair himself. He used to keep it scribbled on a note in his desk, but recently he moved it to his digital memo pad, secured by a 4-digit PIN, his late mother's birthday, I think. I don't know the exact date, but I saw him entering it once. This was the opening Kyra needed. She didn't need the exact date, she needed the method. A brief, covert exploration of Alistair's public social media presence, easy to find as he loved publicity, revealed his late mother's birth year, 1948. Kyra systematically began to test the 4-digit combinations using a specialized script she designed utilizing the bank's own server infrastructure during her computer science lessons, masking her activity as advanced data processing. The script worked, slowly and silently, checking against known 4-digit patterns from public records and financial data points. The night of the gala arrived. The Sovereign Pinnacle Trust was illuminated like a fortress dressed for a grand ball. Inside, the city's elite, including Alistair Vance, in a pristine tuxedo, celebrated their wealth and influence. Kyra, using a pre-planned ruse, convinced her personal security officer she needed a special book from the bank's rare archives for a crucial early morning history report. It was an unconventional request, but her academic excellence and compliance had earned her enough goodwill for the guard to reluctantly agree to a supervised late-night drive to the bank's side entrance. They arrived precisely at the moment the major speeches were beginning inside, drawing the minimal security staff toward the main atrium.
Kyra, feigning discomfort from the flash photography she claimed to be anticipating, insisted on wearing a large hooded scarf, ostensibly to avoid attention. Once inside the relatively deserted archive annex, Kyra acted quickly. She utilized a high-frequency jamming device disguised as an innocuous key fob to momentarily disable the security camera feed in the secluded corridor leading to Alistair's private elevator. "Wait here, I need to get the archive manager's key from the administrative desk," she told the guard, who was distracted by a crackle on his radio regarding a minor commotion at the main entrance. Kyra didn't head to the administrative desk. She sprinted down the silent, luxurious hallway, reaching Alistair's private elevator. She used a slim, customized bypass card Serafina had provided, gaining entry. The elevator whisked her silently to the executive floor, arriving directly into the outer office of Alistair Vance. The office was empty, bathed in the soft glow of emergency lighting. Her heart hammered, but her movements were precise and methodical. She moved to the enormous wooden door of Alistair's inner sanctum. The lock was heavy-duty, but her practiced hands worked quickly with her specialized tension wrench and picks. Within 90 seconds, the satisfying click echoed faintly in the silence. She slipped inside, shutting the door soundlessly behind her. The terminal sat waiting. On the oversized desk, an island of potential evidence in a sea of corporate luxury. She activated the screen. The biometric login request appeared. She placed a synthetic fingerprint patch, designed to mimic a generic employee print, over the scanner, failing the login exactly 4 times. On the 5th attempt, the screen displayed the numerical keypad, the moment of truth. She input the 4 digits she had discovered through her data scraping, utilizing the bank's own server infrastructure during her computer science lessons, masking her activity as advanced data processing. The script worked, slowly and silently, checking against known 4-digit patterns from public records and financial data points. The 4 digits she had discovered through her data scraping, the moment of truth. She input the 4 digits, the year of her mother's birth, 1948. The screen flashed green. Access granted. Kyra was in.
Inside the sanctuary of Alistair Vance's inner office, Kira wasted no time. The high-powered executive terminal, now unlocked, gave her unfettered access to the deepest levels of the Sovereign Pinnacle Trust digital architecture. She immediately bypassed the bank's public interface and dove into Alistair's personal folders, focusing on archived communications and historical legal documents related to the Thorne estate. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, executing the pre-written search scripts she had meticulously developed. She was looking for specific keywords: Thorne liability, activation clause, Jones mother, and fee maximization. The minutes ticked by, each second charged with the potential for discovery or disaster. She located a heavily encrypted subfolder labeled simply 48VT. Using a basic brute force decryption technique she had learned, which exploited the common corporate habit of using sequentially complex passphrases, she cracked the folder's security barrier. Inside, the evidence lay waiting, cold and damning. Kira found a chain of emails dating back 3 months before her mother's death, addressed from Alistair Vance to his personal counsel, detailing the potential windfall from the Thorne Trust. One email was a detailed analysis of Clause 4B, the restrictive activation requirement. Alistair explicitly wrote, "The key is ensuring the beneficiary fails to meet the executive terminal requirement. The mother is easily dissuaded. She's too proud to ask for help and lacks the connections to demand a principal officer's assistance. If the account remains dormant for 10 years, the management fees alone will be astronomical, securing our division's future. Maintain distance from the mother, let nature and her circumstance run its course." The email was a smoking gun. It proved beyond a doubt that Alistair not only knew Kara's mother held the key to the fortune, but actively engineered her continued destitution to maximize his own profits. The 10-year mark, which would have legally solidified Alistair's management control with enhanced fees, was just a few months away when Kyra finally found the courage to step into the bank. A wave of intense, visceral grief and fury washed over Kira. She felt the full, crushing weight of her mother's final cold days, realizing they were directly attributable to the callous financial calculation of the man whose chair she was sitting in. Her hands trembled, but her purpose was renewed and sharpened into an ice pick of resolve. This was no longer just about survival. It was about absolute, public, and irrevocable retribution. Kira didn't stop to read every word. She activated the specialized data extraction device, a tiny solid-state drive disguised as a flash memory stick. She rapidly mirrored the entire 48VT folder and several other related documents, detailing the bank's internal accounting of the dormant fees, the millions the bank had already skimmed off the top. The transfer bar crept slowly across the screen. Just as the progress bar hit 90%, the silence of the executive suite was broken by a soft, insistent beep from the door. Kira froze. Alistair's personal assistant, whom she hadn't accounted for, was using her access key to enter the outer office. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but Kira forced herself to remain physically still. She knew that any sudden movement would alert the sound monitoring systems. The transfer reached 100%. Kira quickly ejected the drive, cleared the recent activity log, and forced the computer to a screensaver showing financial headlines. She replaced the chair exactly as she found it, using a cloth to wipe down any possible fingerprints on the desk surface or the lockpicks, which she quickly stored. She slipped out of the inner office just as the assistant was rounding the corner, carrying a small, personalized tray. The assistant stopped short, startled to see Kira there. "Miss Jones, what are you doing here? The rare archives are on the lower level." Kira put on the performance of a lifetime, generating instant, hot tears. I couldn't find the right elevator. I got lost. I was looking for the bathroom. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to disturb anything." She made herself look small, frightened, and utterly non-threatening, exactly the lost child Alistair expected her to be. The assistant, seeing a crying child in an unfamiliar, high-security area, was immediately sympathetic. "Oh, dear, it's a maze up here. You need to come with me right now. Your guard must be worried sick." The momentary distraction was enough. Kira was escorted quickly out of the inner sanctum, down the private elevator, and back to the waiting security guard, whom she apologized profusely to, explaining her wrong turn. She was successfully extracted from the premises, clutching the tiny, powerful flash drive in the pocket of her new, expensive coat. Back in the secure silence of the brownstone, Kira and Serafina reviewed the files. The proof was undeniable, a history of corporate malice leading directly to the death of Kira's mother. The documents were notarized, digitally signed, and legally binding, perfect for public exposure and criminal prosecution. The final phase of Kira's revenge was not just legal, but dramatic, designed to strip Alistair Vance of his most cherished asset, his reputation and control. Kira and Serafina worked with an independent legal counsel, an older, respected family lawyer Serafina trusted implicitly, who had been waiting in the wings. They didn't go to the police or the financial regulators immediately. Instead, they took the most explosive route. On the morning after the gala, the story broke on a respected, aggressive financial news blog, simultaneously hitting major social media platforms and being picked up by every major financial news wire. The headline, accompanied by Alistair Vance's smug face from the gala, screamed the unvarnished truth. Financial mogul Alistair Vance accused of orchestrating poverty-related death to profit from miners' trust fund. The article contained direct quotes and screenshots from Alistair's internal emails, provided anonymously, detailing his strategy to let nature run its course on the vulnerable beneficiary's mother. The reaction was instantaneous and cataclysmic. Share prices for the Sovereign Pinnacle Trust plummeted. Regulators launched emergency investigations. The bank's board of directors, desperate to contain the damage and distance themselves from the scandal, called an emergency session. Alistair Vance, awoken by the frantic calls from his board, watched his empire crumble in real time. He was immediately placed on forced leave, his accounts frozen, his reputation irrevocably destroyed. The wealth he had built and the power he wielded were vaporized by the very thing he sought to control, a simple trust fund and a child's unwavering pursuit of justice. Kira, now fully protected by independent counsel and the sheer force of public opinion, was granted full, immediate legal emancipation by the court. She stood, not as a victim, but as a wealthy, self-possessed young woman who had just brought down one of the city's titans. The money was now hers, legally and ethically, to manage as she saw fit. But the true prize was the silence of justice, the knowledge that her mother's suffering had been avenged, and the man who profited from it was ruined. The streets that once held Kira in fear now seemed smaller, less daunting, illuminated by the cold, clear light of her hard-won victory.